So one of my absolute favorite clips to end up playing and reference on this channel and on social media over and over again is of the late and great comedian Norm Macdonald, where he's making fun of how the Western world responds to Islamic violence and or Islamic terror. And honestly, the best thing I can do for you guys out there in the audience is just play the clip so you can understand where I'm coming from. So we're going to do that, and then I'll explain on the other side.
I can't say my friend's name, but he said his biggest fear is that ISIS or some terrorist group like that will get a hold of a dirty bomb and explode it over a major city within the United States and kill tens of millions of people. Because then the blowback against innocent Muslims would be absolutely terrible.
Yes, that's right.
That's true.
Again, that clip is just cash money, and the thing is, it's 100% true. If a Muslim person ends up getting attacked in the United States or in the Western world, the story is Islamophobia. But if a Muslim person commits an attack, even a terrorist attack, the story is also Islamophobia, because the Western media, specifically the left-wing media, is deathly afraid of calling out Muslims for bad behavior, because, spoiler alert, the undergirding assumption that these people operate on is that you cannot expect good behavior from Muslim individuals. And a perfect example of this, a perfect distillation of this concept on full display for all of us to see, is this absolutely horrible segment from the Young Turks, where, by the way, my literal bestie, somebody that I praised for over a year on this channel for all the positive moves that she's made in her coverage, Ana Kasparian, is also terrible in this segment, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
As far as the investigation itself, we're still trying to verify and confirm some video, but it appears to show a significant portion of the incident as it happened. There's an individual that's taken into custody. He's a white male. Whether or not that's the person that police ultimately arrested and will ultimately charge in this crime, a bit of a question at this time, but that's just what we've seen so far.
I also want to point out, which is not mentioned in this Young Turks segment, that MSNBC called this Egyptian who is of Muslim origin a white guy on their broadcast, which allows me to use this Ana Kasparian clip.
There's an individual that's taken into custody. He's a white male.
Oh, so you said that it was a white guy. What happened?
Again, classic, and I definitely appreciate it. But in addition to that, as I've talked about before, Anna's mom is currently going through a bunch of different health struggles. And even though I think she's completely wrong in this segment, I do want to send my best well wishes to Mama Kasparian, wish her a speedy recovery, because honestly, like, family and all of that stuff takes precedent over politics each and every time. And if you can't separate the personal from the political, you're the problem in this country. So again, send your best well wishes to Mama Kasparian, because she's going through a rough time, and I think we should all be supportive. Let's get into the attacks now.
Boulder police responding to calls of people being set on fire during a peaceful demonstration in support of Israeli hostages.
So I think it's important for you guys to understand the structure of this segment and why I find it so off-putting, and why I think it harkens back to old school Young Turks videos where they would cover some kind of violence or attack from the left wing, and without fail, Cenk Ana would go out of his way in order to work in Dylan Roof into the conversation, or something that has nothing to do with the subject matter, in order to deflect from the violence that is clearly and obviously coming from his political side. And a perfect example of this, again, can be found in the structure of this particular segment. We end up opening with 30 seconds of news footage, giving you a bit of an explainer. Then, following that, we get 40 seconds from Ana Kasparian, giving you additional facts on this particular case. Let me play that for you right there.
Well, that man that you just saw in that video launched a horrific attack on demonstrators in Boulder, Colorado over the weekend. The individuals had gathered in support of the Israeli hostages who remain in captivity held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Now, using Molotov cocktails and a makeshift flamethrower, the man injured 8 people and is now being held on multiple charges, including a federal hate crime. Now, the assailant, I should say, attacked a weekly walk that's actually organized by a Jewish group called Run for Their Lives.
And now we're at around the 110 mark, and the political commentary, the opinion, the takeaway on this story is actually going to start. So ask yourself how quickly this ends up turning into Palestinians and pro-Palestinians are the real victims. Ask yourself when this is going to shift from Muslim did a terrorism to, in reality, Israel bad, America bad, and oh my God, think about the poor Palestinian advocates, because they're the real victims in this particular case. Again, Jews set on fire, Muslims most affected.
And Cenk, these idiotic attacks happen. And I'm not sure if the attackers are under any assumption that this is going to have any impact on what's currently happening in the Middle East. But all it does is harm demonstrators who want to peacefully demonstrate in support of Palestinians. It hurts the Palestinian cause, and it targets innocent people, including elderly individuals who aren't doing anything wrong. They're exercising their rights in getting together to hold a demonstration in support of the, hostages that remain captive in Gaza.
It took about 10 seconds. It took about 10 seconds for them to shift the narrative to all this does is harm the cause, the demonstrators who are peacefully trying to support the Palestinian cause. And then the third thing on Anna's list was, it harms the people that were actually harmed in this particular case. It harms the people who actually suffered significant burns, including elderly people. One of them was reported to be a survivor of the Holocaust. Those people are also harmed, but after the pro-Palestinians, after the peace protesters, the alleged peace protesters, those people are also kind of harmed, the ones that were attacked in this particular case. And one of the things that makes this incredibly disgusting, by the way, is that the people who were running to free the hostages, these were not your hardcore Zionist, hardcore Israeli supporters or anything of the sort. In fact, one of them was actually wearing a Free Palestine shirt. They wanted the hostages freed because they understand, even though they are on the Palestinian cause, that Hamas is a greatly immoral entity. So these people in reality were the peace protesters. These people in reality were the ones who wanted some kind of settlement, some kind of solution on this particular issue. And they were attacked because they dareth march for the Israeli hostages. And by the way, this is something that is represented more broadly in the overall Palestinian movement. We have heard and seen story after story of these posters of the missing and taken hostages going up across the Western world, and time after time, what do the Palestinian protesters do? They rip down those posters. And Douglas Murray, by the way, actually called out Cenk Uygur on this on Piers Morgan forever ago, where he mentioned to him that if you put up a missing dog poster in a Western country, that is not going to get removed, but suddenly it becomes an issue when it's missing Jews in Israel, and obviously this is indicative of broader problems in the movement. Now, to be 100% fair and 100% clear, I want to make this point for everybody out there in the audience who's already panic typing negative comments. This does not mean that the broader people who want a ceasefire, who are protesting the war, who are protesting U.S. money going to the Israeli government in order for them to have this war, are in support of this guy's violence or anything of the sort. But there is a connection there. It is clear and obvious for us to see that there is a disdain for people who talk about the hostages, who talk about the crimes of Hamas. So this guy is not far removed from these alleged peace protesters, at least in ideology, although his actions are clearly and obviously unique, appalling, and should be condemned. But instead, we're condemning it because it casts aspersions against the broader Palestinian movement in the United States of America. I mean, people are going to think less of those who burn our American flag and block traffic across this country because this guy did a violence, so that should be our number one concern, according to the Young Turks.
Yeah, so as usual with these type of attacks, they are stupid, immoral, counterproductive, disgusting. So people get upset sometimes when I say counterproductive. So let me break that down for you guys. Number one of the people attacked was a Jewish woman who was for peace. So counterproductive as in you're attacking people who are on your side because you're using a metric that makes no sense. Jewish or not Jewish? Well, tons of Jewish people in this country are for peace and for the Palestinian cause of just having two independent states there, et cetera. Number two, you allow people to come in and smear the peace movement overall, as we're going to show you later in the show, right?
So Cenk ends up starting off by saying, hey, look, the metric of using Jewish as a proxy for people that you're going to attack is a bad metric. This is fine commentary. But wouldn't you know it, Cenk immediately, and by the way, he set it up before by talking about counterproductive and emphasizing counterproductive, shifts the topic to, oh, they're smearing the peace protesters. They're smearing the people that are advocating for peace. And that's absolutely horrific and terrible and disgusting because, again, the real issue with this attack on Jewish individuals that are protesting to free the hostage is how, of course, this impacts the Palestinian cause and perception of the Palestinian protesters, who, by the way, Cenk and Ana wrongfully label peace protesters because these people are advocating for a ceasefire. By definition, they are not, in fact, peace protesters because guess what? This area has had nothing but ceasefires for decades. If ceasefires led to peace in the Israel-Palestine conflict, we would have had that decades ago. In reality, what ceasefires actually do is allow the terror organization who initiates the attack against Israel to remain in power and lower the consequences for them. And again, this is a broader point that I've made since the start of the war, which is Israel as a nation state has an obligation to try to force Hamas from power, either through surrender, which by the way, nobody ever talks about why Hamas doesn't surrender on behalf of its people. Supposedly, they're taking the most heavy losses ever. They're calling it a genocide, but Hamas is staying in power and allowing this to happen because all they care about is staying in power, but nobody discusses that because, you know, that would involve expecting a Muslim governing organization to act with some kind of standards and in some kind of normal way, acknowledge that they lost a war. But regardless of that, the Israeli goal in the war has to be removing them from power because if Hamas is allowed to stay in power, the message that they'll take from this whole situation is that they can do anything to the Israelis and not be removed from power. Now, conversely, if Hamas is removed from power as a consequence for his actions, that is something that all future governments in the territory will have to live under, and it's a change in the status quo. And any governing force that would come into power after their removal has to live under the idea that, hey, guess what? If we cross the line, we will be removed from power, and that actually takes violence as a solution closer to being off the table than a ceasefire does. But, you know, that's logic. That's not allowing my emotions to look into this. That's not me being obsessed with the Jews or the specifics of the conflict, just understanding how power structures work, how incentives work. That's me reading the essay, which I recommend and will link in the description, Cease the Ceasefires, in the description of this video, which documents and talks about how all the constant push for ceasefires does is just lower the consequences for aggression against Israel, thus making the conflict ongoing and perpetual. But, you know, we're never going to get into any of that. We're never going to talk about the Muslims like they have agency in that area because that would involve actually invoking a standard. Instead, we're going to talk about Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian sentiment because somebody who was clearly and obviously pro-Palestinian decided to burn Jews in the United States of America. So the real issue is how this impacts the Muslims.
The assailant yelled slurs as well as Free Palestine. And now, thanks to the fact that this terrible person had used that phrase, as Cenk mentions, you see on cable news all sorts of people saying anyone who utters that phrase is anti-Semitic.
Now, the Young Turks does get into the grisly details of this particular crime. They talk about the injuries that these people suffered. We're not going to cover that, but I do want to make note of the fact that it is in the segment. It's good that it's in the segment. You're actually giving a real breadth and weight to the attack that actually happened. But again, after they're reading off the facts, after they play information from the witnesses, is, see how quickly this segment pivots to, oh my God, think about the poor Palestinian activists in the United States of America.
A criminal complaint said Solomon specifically targeted the Zionist group that had gathered in Boulder, having learned about the group from an online search, and that he had been planning the attack for a year. He stated that he wanted to kill all Zionist people and wished they were all dead, the complaint said.
Now look, we have the fact recap right there. We have the motivation from this individual. And I know like Zionist technically means that you are in favor of the Jews having a state, like in general, that's like the base definition. But typically Zionist means in the context that it is hurled at people, Jew or somebody who is in support of the current Israeli government. And as I pointed out with one of these people who were in this march wearing a Free Palestine shirt, these were not people that were in support of the war as it is currently being waged right now, but it didn't matter because this guy was substituting Jew for Zionist, which is something that we often see. It is a very thinly veiled code word, but after Ana gives you that information in the facts in what he said right there in that particular paragraph, again, let's see what direction she goes with this. Is she going to explain how, this is kind of like a thinly veiled slur against random ordinary Jewish people? Oftentimes it has nothing to do with whether or not they're pro-Israel, pro-Netanyahu, pro-war, or anything of the sort. It's just about going after Jews. No, she ends up saying, guess what? The real victims are the Palestinian protesters.
So look, not only was this a heinous attack that caused severe injuries to innocent people, what this obviously does is it creates a chilling effect when it comes to Americans exercising their right to speech, to assemble, to protest, to demonstrate.
Again, we hear about the chilling effect on people who want to protest peacefully, not the chilling effect, by the way, for people who want to protest on behalf of their beliefs or support for the Israeli government, the chilling effect on the Palestinian activists. Ana, I don't know what's going on right here. Like, do you watch this segment back and think to yourself, damn, I kind of like made this whole story about the side that the attacker was on and how they were the real victims in this rather than the actual victims? And make no mistake about it, they do express sympathy for the victims. And in this particular case, it's pretty easy for them to do so, because these people were not protesting in favor of the war. They were actually protesting for a solution. They were wearing, again, Free Palestine memorabilia. None of that mattered to the attacker, but it does matter, to their credit, to Cenk and Ana.
And what makes this even worse, I mean, it's terrible in every single way, but what makes it even worse is these are people who were demonstrating for peace. And he decided it's a good idea to attack these people.
And I give them credit for actually looking into them as people. I'm not just calling them anti-Semitic, because obviously they point out that these are Jewish people that actually largely agree with them, which makes this even more upsetting for them. And Cenk even says at some point in time throughout the course of this segment, I'll try to find the clip for you guys, that even if they were pro-war, this is a wildly inappropriate attack, which again, he deserves credit for.
Yeah, they were largely demonstrating to get the hostages homes, which is a perfectly great thing to demonstrate for. They weren't demonstrating in favor of the war, and by the way, it wouldn't matter if they were.
This is not the full embrace of the violence. This is, of course, them deflecting off the primary main issue, spending most of their time opening their segment with, of course, how it impacts the Palestinian side, when clearly and obviously this was a pro-Palestinian terrorist that was attacking Jewish people that he perceived to be Zionist monsters, Zionist people that deserve pain, and of course, he wants them all dead. And by the way, this is not surprising. This is not a difficult leap from these particular groups. They keep getting referred to as peace protesters, but need I remind you that multiple Palestinian groups ended up coming out in celebration of October 7th before Israel ended up doing their retaliation, praising the most vicious of the attackers. Remember that rally where the guy talked about heroes on hang gliders?
When the Palestinians broke through the fence, they put the F-35s on trailers. As you might have seen, there was some sort of rave or desert party where they were having a great time until the resistance came in electrified hang gliders and took at least several dozen hipsters but I'm sure they're doing very fine despite what the New York Post says.
Again, while huge portions of this population, of this protesting group, won't engage in violence themselves, and by the way, I am thankful for that, the fact is, they do support the violence overseas, which, to be clear, is protected by the First Amendment right. You can say verbally that you support violence by this group against that group overseas. It's not a direct call for violence in the United States of America, so I'm not saying they should be punished for it in terms of criminal consequences. But what I'm pointing out is that broadly labeling these people as peace protesters is absurd when they show you time and time again they are anything but. They want the Muslim side to win, regardless of what that means for the Jewish side. Some of these people definitely are pursuing peace, for sure, on that side. That's what they believe in their hearts, but huge portions of them were all cheering that guy talking about the heroes and hang gliders in an aggressively violent attack. And the Young Turks, they don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about how, oh, this guy who did this attack that is in line broadly with what is supported by broad swaths of the pro-Palestinian movement is making them look bad because he's showing them for who they are. But we're going to say making them look bad because those are the peaceful side. Those are the peace protesters. Wink, wink.
Yeah, and this story, this horrific event is being used to essentially make phrases like Free Palestine taboo. So I'll give you a specific example. Just today, CNN's Dana Bash was interviewing a Democratic congressman by the name of Greg Landsman. He's from Ohio. And she asked him to connect the dots between the suspects behind recent anti-Semitic attacks in Boulder, Colorado and Washington, D.C., saying, you know, they seem to say the same phrases, as if every single person who uses a phrase indicating they want to free Palestine is going to carry out acts of violence. Obviously, the vast majority of individuals who believe that Palestinians should have their own state do not engage in violence, would never engage in violence.
You know, it's like I've been taken back in time 5-6 years ago when the Young Turks would produce videos that I would often just make fun of because they were full of nothing statements like theirs. So Anna paraphrases a quote from a congressman. They're going to read it later, and I'm going to explain to you how insane their interpretation of this quote is. And she's like, well, it's as if he's saying this about the people who say free Palestine, when in reality, 100% of the people who say that aren't going to go out and commit violence. Thank you for that, Anna. Thank you for explaining that. I actually thought it was 100% of those people that were going to do terrorism, that were going to kill the Jews. I thought it was all of them, but you have clarified that with that totally not worthless statement right there by saying, oh, it's not 100% of them. But the thing is, Anna, the issue that people have is that it's not 0%, and a large portion of those people do support the violence, do support the terrorist organizations that commit the violence, do support Hamas, and that is an issue in and of itself. Now, again, I'm willing to grant that there are a ton of people that say free Palestine for a variety of reasons that not only don't support Hamas, but also don't support violence. They are peaceniks. They want a peaceful solution. I 100% understand that, but it seems like you're going out of your way, both you and Cenk, to not understand what this congressman is saying or what anybody is worried about or the actual main point of this story, which is the people who were actually attacked, not the perception of the ideology of the attackers. Again, your priorities are a little bit out of whack. You see people get burned and you think, I think that might negatively impact the people who believe similar things to the guy who did the burning, and I don't like that.
But the Democratic congressman said, yes, there's 3 phrases here that people should get to know better. One of them is the use of Zionism, and I believe he said, and Zionism is simply the idea of a Jewish self-determination. So anyone who says that they're against Zionism, connect the dots, may be a dangerous person. But then he goes on to say that phrases like free Palestine are problematic. And then the third has to do with free Palestine. If you believe that Israel is there and should not be there, the idea of free Palestine means not peace for Palestinians, which this group was supporting, which I support and am working for. Free Palestine means getting rid of all the Jews. No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. The vast majority of people who say free Palestine want the Palestinian people to have their own state.
So if you can't tell what was happening right there, and maybe it's due to the emotional connection, the emotional attachment to the Palestinian cause that Ana and Cenk feel, but they completely misinterpreted his quote right there. He clearly and obviously was making a distinction between people who say free Palestine because they want an independent state for the Palestinians, people who get self-determination because everybody gets self-determination, and those who, when they say free Palestine, mean they want to wipe out the Jews. They want to get rid of the Jewish state, which he considered to be completely different. And by the way, you don't have to take my word for it, because Ana's haphazard reading of the quote isn't something that we have to rely on. We can go to the tape ourselves and hear what this guy said, the context in which he said it. And by the way, take note of the fact that the second phrase that they didn't read the quote about was globalized intifada, which is the other thing that he was saying that gives you an indication of where people are going from, was removed from the Young Turks segment. They went from 1 to 3, never told you what 2 was, and then told you that this guy was calling out anybody who says free Palestine when nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, so there's 3 phrases here that people should get to know better. And this is part of stopping anti-Semitism, is understanding it. The American Jewish Committee, the AJC, this is what they do. You can go to their website and download content, share it with everybody. This is part of how we stop this. One of them is the use of Zionism, and I believe he said, and Zionists. Zionism is simply this idea of Jewish self-determination, where Jews, because of the history, but also just because we're human beings, have the right to self-determination, that we believe in having a place for us. And that is true for everybody. Everyone should have a place for themselves. And so there isn't anything wrong with that, I don't believe. And to say you can't have that is anti-Semitic. Also to say I'm going to end Zionists, that is a threat to kill Jews.
Now again, we're going to walk through this. That was his number 1 point. That was the Zionist thing. That was something that he said he indicates as the starting of a red flag, but not necessarily a red flag on its own. Then he follows it up with the globalized intifada, which is a very popular chant among these alleged peace protesters, even though it is clearly and obviously a call to violence. Do you know what the intifadas were? I don't know how to make this any more clear, but whatever, let's play that clip.
The second has to do with the global intifada. The intifada, there were 2, included, wasn't limited to, but included suicide bombings and killing of Jews. So you don't want to globalize that.
And then there's, of course, the Free Palestine clip that he brings up after that.
And then the third has to do with Free Palestine. If you believe that Israel is there and should not be there, the idea of Free Palestine means not peace for Palestinians, which this group was supporting, which I support and am working hard for. Free Palestine means getting rid of all of the Jews, either by kicking them out or by killing them. That means that there is no more Israel.
So look, you've heard the clips. You've heard Ana read the quote. The quote that she even read didn't indicate he was going in the direction that she was going in, and then you saw the reaction. And if you don't think that she took this congressman out of context or she misrepresented what he said, either unintentionally or if you want to attribute sinister motivations intentionally, then you're just wrong, because clearly she is inaccurate. If he was saying that Free Palestine always means get rid of all the Jews by kicking them out or killing them, then why would he say that these people supported that and he supports it as well? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't compute. Obviously, they owe this congressman an apology because they go off on him based on this clear and obvious false interpretation of what he said, and it's embarrassing to see. Again, Ana, you've done so much better than this in recent years. I don't make this out of hatred for you or anything of the sort. Obviously, I have grown to like Ana. I'm a supporter of Ana in many respects, but this is a throwback to the bad old days of TYT. There's nothing wrong with what this guy said. What he was warning about and connecting the dots on were 3 phrases put together that he thinks indicate a negative ideology, or in his opinion, an anti-Semitic ideology, which is the anti-Zionist stuff, where you nonstop talk about the Zionists. Then you go into the global intifada, which is clearly and obviously a call to violence. And then following that up, when you say Free Palestine, in that you want the Jews to not be there, those 3 things things are giant red flags. But instead, you hack off a piece of the end of that and you say, oh, well, he's saying everybody that says Free Palestine wants to get rid of the Jews, when in the very quote that you read, he says he's supportive of that, and he specifically clarified that he's only talking about the people who mean that or say that they mean that when they say Free Palestine. Again, absurd in every way. This whole entire segment is now about a Jewish congressman who said nothing wrong rather than the victims of this attack.
So Israelis get self-determination, but the Palestinian people don't get that. And anyone who calls for that is apparently anti-Semitic, and we should keep an eye on them because they're going to carry out acts of violence?
No, Anna. No, not at all. In fact, he quite literally said the reason Jews have self-determination and why he's a supporter of Zionism is because everybody has self-determination.
One of them is the use of Zionism, and I believe he said, and Zionism is simply this idea of Jewish self-determination, where Jews, because of the history, but also just because we're human beings, have the right to self-determination.
So Israelis get self-determination, but the Palestinian people don't get that.
Where Jews, because of the history, but also just because we're human beings, have the right to self-determination.
And he said that he's in favor of Free Palestine.
And then the third has to do with Free Palestine. If you believe that Israel is there and should not be there, the idea of Free Palestine means not peace for Palestinians, which this group was supporting, which I support and am working hard for. Free Palestine means getting rid of all of the Jews, either by kicking them out or by killing them. That means that there is no more Israel.
Because it doesn't always mean that. He said in this specific context, this is what they mean by that, and that's something to watch out for, which I think is kind of sage advice when you have two different attackers that interpreted it in this way. I don't know how to make this any more clear. I don't know why you're doing this, why you're getting this wrong. Again, I feel like you're a little bit too emotionally attached to this, and maybe if you watch this back, you will realize that you completely took this guy out of context. And again, this is some Democratic congressman from Ohio. Like, I got no love for the guy, don't know anything about the guy, but there's nothing objectively wrong with what he said in this particular clip, so I have no reason to just throw him under the bus.
Yeah.
Absurd.
Yeah. So Greg Landsman should be voted out of office. You should make sure that you go to the primary in his district and vote against them. So now trying to free Palestinians is going to get you labeled not just anti-Semite, that's old school, right? But that you want to kill all Jews because you want Palestine to be free. Okay, that's the ravings of a lunatic mind. I'm not interested in a person with mental deficiencies being a US congressman.
I actually 100% agree with Cenk Uygur right here. Those are the ravings of a lunatic mind, but unfortunately for Cenk, it didn't come out of the congressman's mind, it came out of his. This is just made up. We are now compounding on the lie, again, moving further and further away from Muslim did terror attack against Jewish people and talking about something that Cenk concocted in his head that is completely false. Even in the quote itself, Landsman said clearly and obviously he's in favor of Free Palestine. Why would he say that this means kill all the Jews and then say he's in favor of it in the same sentence unless he's making a separation and a quite reasonable separation in that? That's exactly what's in the original tape. And what's even more wild is that he didn't even say kill all the Jews in the most extreme example. He said kick out or kill them. Again, let me play the clip.
And then the third has to do with Free Palestine. If you believe that Israel is there and should not be there, the idea of Free Palestine means not peace for Palestinians, which this group was supporting, which I support and am working hard for. Free Palestine means getting rid of all of the Jews, either by kicking them out or by killing them. That means that there is no more Israel.
So Cenk calls it the ravings of a madman and then says that this guy has mental deficiencies because this exists in his mind and he's not interested in him being in Congress. And guess what, Cenk? Since that came from your mind, and I guess you're talking about your own mental deficiencies, I guess you supported the 5% of the primary vote that you got when you decided to run for Congress because people were not interested in having you in office. Because again, this is all made made up. This whole entire segment has been wildly disproportionately devoted to defending the Palestinian cause when, again, the person who initiated the attack, the terror Rick in this particular case, was on that side. And again, it's just sad to see. It's sad to see Ana Kasparian do this. Honestly, I expect this from Cenk. He has not moved as far or whatever or committed to truth or all that stuff as much as Ana has. And I think that this is honestly going to be one of those segments in a few years that you're going to find embarrassing because you just ripped that guy out of context. Like, you just made up a thing based on what he said that is quite literally the opposite of what he said. And again, I got no loyalty to the guy. I'm not a big supporter of the guy. I don't know anything about him. He's a Democratic congressman, so I'll probably be in favor of him being voted out of office if we just go to partisan hackery. But yeah, this was just wild and inappropriate and ridiculous. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about TYT, Cenk, and sadly Ana running cover for the Egyptian terrorists in Colorado. Till next time.